Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Nick Zulovich, Senior Editor at Cherokee Media Group, and delighted to have you part of our session today titled, The Impact of EVs and How to Position Your Dealership for Long-Term Success, with our featured expert, Kevin Roberts, who is Director of Industry Insights at CarGurus. Before we get to Kevin's presentation, just a couple of quick items to mention. We are recording today's session, so keep watch of a message landing in your inbox soon, containing a link so you can watch the session again and share it with your colleagues. If you have a question for Kevin, please use the chat function here on Zoom, and we'll get to those questions after his presentation. So that's more than enough from me. Let's get right to Kevin Roberts from CarGurus for our session titled, The Impact of EVs and How to Position Your Dealership for Long-Term Success. Mr. Kevin Roberts and #1 Detroit Lions fan, take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, in our pre-chat, we were discussing how being a Detroit Lions fan for the first time ever is now a bit of a fun thing to travel the U.S. Where we're no longer talking about how sad things are, and the Thanksgiving game might be kind of fun. So thanks for having me. Happy to be here. Again, can't believe it's already October. I see October on this starting slide, and it's hard to believe. But here to talk today about EVs and the impact on dealerships. So to kind of get started, we can move on here. And the agenda, three kind of rough sections I wanted to talk about. One, talk about EVs are coming and talk about why that is. I think we kind of spend a lot of time discussing about, are EVs going to really take off? So I wanted to spend some time talking about why the EVs are going to be coming into the marketplace, whether, and how that's really going to be kind of affecting things. Two, how the EV market is evolving. If we had this conversation 12, 18 months back, a lot of the themes that we'd be talking about would actually be quite a bit different. So really talk about how the EV market's kind of evolving and how that's impacting dealerships in the current environment. And then three, kind of turning some of those EV challenges into opportunities. So really kind of talk about how dealerships can take this kind of evolving environment with electric vehicles and turn some of those challenges into opportunities. So first things first, talk about EVs are coming and why we're really seeing them come into the marketplace. So first things first. Fuel economy standards are going to be rising significantly in the coming years. So two different components of this. So we have, in the US, we have the corporate average fuel economy standards. And so those are locked in currently through 2026. And we're already going to see some rather aggressive increases in what the corporate average fuel economy is going to need to be for both passenger cars and light duty trucks. And then we're also now in the negotiation time period for what the standards are going to be going through the 2032 model year. And so what I did here was kind of put in what the historical data has been, what the standards are through 2026, and then put in some of the initial kind of projections that are out there for 2032. Again, since we're in kind of this negotiation time period, nothing is locked in place with regards to these standards. But you can see directionally where they're kind of looking to go. And you can see that the numbers look to be going up quite significantly over the next decade. Corporate average fuel economy is relatively flat for the greater part of the early 2000s. It's been moving up over the past decade through, the 2010s. But since we got to 2020 beyond, you can see how quickly it's going to go up. And so this is one of the reasons why EVs are going to be coming into the marketplace, no matter how you feel about them or relatively consumers feel about them, because for automakers, they're going to have the need to, stay in compliance with the corporate average fuel economy standards, or they're going to face a large amount of fines on that front. So that's why we're seeing such a heavy push towards EVs from the OEM perspective. because they're looking at these types of miles per gallon targets. And it's going to be exceedingly difficult to meet these without having a large percentage of your fleet be towards electric vehicles. So this is one reason that we're expecting EVs to really be coming into the marketplace. Second one is beyond just the corporate average fuel economy regulations. We're also seeing a lot of targets, either just kind of soft targets, what people are looking for, or some more types of hard targets to move away from internal combustion engine vehicles. And so included in here some kind of informal targets that have come out of the White House. And then we've also got some targets that have come out from CARB, so the California Air Resource Board, which sets its own emissions standards for California. And there are a number of states who also follow those emission standards as well. So if you're looking at these as kind of rough type of targets, and especially since we've seen similar types of targets or caps put in place in other countries or cities in Europe or in China, you can see these types of targets are going to move rather aggressively from where we are now. So the dark blue line there is giving you battery electric vehicle sales as a percentage of total sales and where we've kind of gone so far. And you can see how aggressively the battery electric vehicle share of new vehicle sales is going to have to move if we're going to want to be able to reach some of these targets. Again, so a lot of these targets aren't hard locked into place. They can be a little bit more kind of directional targets. But if these targets do turn into hard caps of where sales need to go, we're going to have to see a large number of electric vehicles take over as a percentage of sales. And again, that's why automakers are really focusing so much on EVs right now and trying to bring them to market. So that's kind of the regulatory environment and why we're seeing EVs kind of come into the marketplace. If you look at how different forecasts see EVs come into the marketplace, you can see it's pretty varied. And I will say that depending on who you're pulling the forecast from and what government agency they're aligned to or what they're kind of viewing, you'll see a quite dramatic spread here. So you can see that you can see a forecast that's projecting sales by the end of the decade to be as low as 18% of total sales. Again, that's a pretty significant increase from where we are right now, around 7%. And you can see sales forecasts that are projecting us to get all the way to 50% of sales, which is going to be aligned to some of the top end ranges of some of the targets we were seeing on the previous slide. So it's important to note that there is some uncertainty out there. We know why automakers are investing so heavily in electric vehicles, because they're looking at the emission standards. They're looking at the targets out there. And if they're going to try to meet those standards, they need to get more of those electric vehicles into the fleet. But you can see the real kind of uncertainty right now is, are consumers going to be purchasing those vehicles at an aggressive enough rate that would allow us to get to that point of view. So that's kind of the underlying environment of where we are right now. But just know that more electric vehicles are going to be coming to the marketplace. And if we are going to have to meet these emission standards, they're going to have to become the kind of predominant powertrain choice of vehicles out there. So with that out of the way, let's kind of talk about how the EV market is evolving. So it's really kind of shifted in three major ways over the past 12, 18 months. So as I mentioned, the market's really been shifting. I would say it's been a bit of a bumpy ride for the industry and for dealers in particular. So first thing we've been seeing is price declines. So new and used EVs have seen some really wild price swings over the past 12 to 18 months. We'll dive into what's been going on there. Rising inventory. So this is a great thing out in the marketplace. We're seeing inventory starting to increase out there. But that's also kind of shifted the environment where historically, I would say every EV was a bit of a hot seller on the marketplace. We're starting to see a little bit of a shakeup there. And then a demand wall. We were talking about EV sales forecasts and how that looks. And I think we'll see, are we seeing a little bit of a demand wall out there? And are we going to be able to get beyond that to kind of reach some of those sales targets out there? So price declines. So this is looking at month over month price changes for new and used EVs on CarGurus. And you can see that for the most part, for 2021 and good parts of 2022, we were seeing a lot of sequential month-over-month price increases for electric vehicles, which was great for OEMs and was great for dealers, as you're in an environment where if you took a EV on your lot, even if it didn't move quite quickly, even though a lot of them were, you would be dealing with an environment where that vehicle will continue to see appreciation. You can see that as we moved into 2023, the story has shifted quite a bit. And that for the most part, we've been seeing pretty consistent month-over-month declines for EVs throughout the year. And for used, this really kind of shifted around July 2022, when the overall market shifted. And used EVs have seen some pretty significant declines from that point onward. If we take these month-over-month percentage changes and take a look at it from a year-over-year perspective, you can start to see a little bit more clearly about what's been going on. So for new, you can see there's a rather large spike in new EV prices in 2022, and we peaked around the summer, early fall of 2022, and the prices have been coming down ever since then, which has really been a shift for the overall consumer marketplace there, and really a shift for dealers. More impactful on the dealership side has been what's been going on with used prices, where you can see that prices went up rather significantly through 2021, through 2022, up until about July, and then prices started to go down. Again, that y-axis there is quite large. And so we've been seeing pretty large year-over-year price declines for used EVs of 40, 30, 40%. For a number of months now. So particularly on the dealership side, that's been really rough. If you took in an EV trade-in, you could be looking at a situation where that vehicle could be depreciating quite quickly, which has really been impacting, dealerships and how they're viewing EVs from that overall perspective. So one thing that we're going to really highlight during this kind of conversation is it's really easy to talk about EVs at a national level, but EVs are not evolving consistently across a national level at all. They're highly dependent upon what state you're in. And it could be even as, much more kind of dependent upon what is going on within your even like kind of local area. Zip code, county can really kind of change things. So when we were talking about those price shifts at a national level, the trends are pretty significant. But if you actually break this down by an individual state level, you can see some states on a year-over-year basis are actually up on prices, and some states are down. And so this is where it's important to note not every state is going to be feeling this equally, particularly depending on where your overall inventory is really sitting, can really be impacting things. So particularly states like California, Texas, Florida, Illinois, New York, Washington, where the overall predominant inventory of electric vehicles tends to be, tend to set the narrative a little bit more. But individual states across the union can see a little bit of a different narrative story there. So then if we actually look at by a make and model, and this is looking at the top 10 price declining vehicles year over year for September, they're actually all electric vehicles. And this one, and you can see how significant a lot of the price declines have been. The 4 Tesla models take up the top 4 spots of the price declines, and they've really been coming down since then. It's important to note that Tesla also has been making price cuts on the new side, which has also kind of increased some of the price declines we've been seeing on the used side of this market as well. And so Tesla is the largest kind of EV manufacturer, seeing some of the largest declines here. But it's important to note a lot of other manufacturers are also seeing declines on the electric side. So large chunk of the EV market continues to see price declines on a year-over-year basis, and that's really starting to impact dealership profitability. If you have an EV trade-in right now, really important to price it appropriately when you take possession of that vehicle, and try to have a better understanding of the market, of how quickly you think you'll be able to move it, and price it accordingly on the trade-in for when you're going to get it. And then also really be prepared for consumers to be quite a bit of shock. I've been hearing, anecdotally, that consumers who bought an EV in the last year or two will go in to a dealership and say, "Oh, I'm thinking about potentially getting a new model. Can you tell me what my vehicle's worth?" And be quite surprised by how significantly the price of that vehicle has shifted from what they purchased 12, 18, 24 months ago. Real surprise on that end, how much prices have shifted. So again, another thing to keep in mind with how much volatility there's been in prices, protecting yourself when you're taking in a trade-in, and additionally, being prepared to educate consumers. You're going to be quite surprised by some of the shifts that have happened in the pricing of EVs. So next kind of shift that we've been seeing going on is rising inventory. And so if we look at, EVs as a percentage of total listings out there, you can see that through, early to mid 2022, inventory levels are still relatively small as a percentage of retail listings. And so important to note, these are retail listings on the new side. So you're not going to see things like direct to consumer EV inventory here. So things like Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, automakers like that who are direct to consumer won't show up in a retail listing inventory. So this won't include that. You can see how low that inventory was and how significantly it's been going up. I will note that, the last 2 months, it looks like the inventory's actually been going down. The inventory is actually still gone up. We've just seen such an influx in internal combustion engine inventory that it's actually made the overall percentage go down. They just haven't kind of continued to increase at the same rate. So new inventory continues to go up. And on the used side, you can see it's been trending up as well. Still relatively small numbers. Again, a large vehicle fleet out there. EVs are a relatively small component of that, but a growing percentage of inventory listings are out there. And when I mentioned before about how different environments are seeing things in different regions, are seeing things differently, I think it's most kind of clear when you see where the vehicles are listed. And this is by DMA, so designated market. And you can see that for the most part, the lion's share of EVs tend to be located in the Los Angeles area or the Bay Area. Overall, the majority of EVs tend to sit within those two markets. And then you've got additional markets such as Seattle, Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., and the like, where we're seeing a lot more of electric vehicles as well. So what that means is when we talk about EV trends nationwide, that doesn't mean we're seeing that equally across all states. So when we talk about rising inventory levels, for the most part, that's rising inventory levels in a select few markets, and most markets are not seeing rising inventory levels. And then we talk about rising sales. That effectively means the large number of these EV sales are actually coming from these kind of few particular markets. And so it's not really kind of a nationwide movement towards electric vehicles that we've been seeing so far. It's much more of a regional shift on that end. Another thing to kind of note within the EV marketplace is we're starting to see not every EV that's coming into the market is seeing the types of sales growth that the initial kind of movers did in the space. And so, if we look at what makes and models are seeing the largest kind of increases out there, you can see that on the new side, we're seeing a lot more increases of new nameplates coming out into the marketplace, which is helping to improve things. And that's where we're seeing that kind of increase there. And on the used side, it tends to be models that were some of the earlier EV models out there, looking at like the Nissan Leaf, that is particularly growing as a percentage of the used EV marketplace out there. So Again, the inventory is growing. It's not growing equally on a geographic point of view, and it's not growing equally from a make or model point of view either, as more of these kind of EVs get out into the marketplace. And one kind of final thing I wanted to mention with regards to kind of not growing equally is that if you actually look at EV count by dealership, you can see how kind of different it's going to be for consumers if they go onto the marketplace. So on the new side, it looks like around over 55% of dealerships have at least one EV on there. If you get down to 5+ EVs, it gets down to 30%, and 10, it's just around 18%. So for consumers who are going onto the marketplace who are looking to get into an EV for the first time, it can be a little bit challenging for them, particularly if they want to see the vehicle, take it for a test drive and the like. And so we're seeing an improvement, particularly on the new side, where more dealerships are getting an EV on lot where they can see it. But if you actually look at it from a used side, you can see how limited it remains. Just slightly above a quarter of dealerships have at least one EV on lot, and it goes down quite significantly from there on more EVs on lots at that end. So it's going to be a challenging environment for consumers who might be interested in an EV if they want to get into a vehicle to kind of take a look at it. It also remains kind of difficult for dealerships if you don't have the vehicles on lot to kind of educate consumers and help them get more comfortable with it. So again, we are seeing rising inventory levels. It is an improvement, but it's not rising everywhere equally. And for consumers, it can be a little bit of a challenging environment if you're looking for an EV to find into. So the third kind of upcoming trend I want to talk about is demand wall, or like how much demand is actually really kind of out there. So when we take a look at sales as a percentage of growing, you can see sales for new and used EVs continue to grow. But the overall percentages of that overall market share looks to be kind of leveling out a little bit as we move forward at this point. So again, we know that the inventory of those EVs tends to be highly dominated in a couple of regions, and that's where the majority of the sales are taking place. And so that kind of leads the question of how much real organic nationwide growth is there potentially for EVs out there, or are we potentially going to be running up to a thing where early adopters have really kind of taken or purchased most of the EVs they're going to be looking for, and could we potentially be seeing a little bit of a demand wall that we need to break through on that front? So it's also important to note that when we talk about demand at this point, Tesla still remains the dominant automaker in this space. If we look at year-to-date sales by automaker, Tesla by far still continues to lead on the new front. That leading share is shrinking over time, particularly as more automakers come out with new EVs in the marketplace. And particularly as they come out with new EVs and marketplaces and segments that are a lot more competitive, or at price points which are a lot more competitive. So we're seeing some shift over there. But as of today, Tesla still remains the dominant automaker when it comes to new EVs. And they have an even still larger share in the used EV marketplace. And again, this is more a relation of the fact of they had such a dominant position for a number of years. Historically, that means there are a much higher percentage of vehicles in operation, which means they're going to continue to have, from a legacy point of view, a continued strength in used EV sales as well. So we continue to see them be a strong player in that space. What we don't know is how consumers are going to feel about them when they're looking for a next vehicle, particularly with some of the price declines that we've been seeing out in the marketplace. Some uncertainty of how that might evolve. And not surprisingly, when we look at where new EVs and used EVs are departing from a state level, it highly dependent upon a couple particular regions. You can see that California as a whole accounts for roughly over a third of new EV departures is coming from California, and 8 states in total make up, nearly 2/3 of new vehicle departures or new EV departures from just 8 states. It's a pretty similar narrative when you look into the used marketplace. California is a little bit less of a dominant state there, still the largest state for vehicle departures. But you can see a little bit more spread out there. But again, top 8 states continue to be the largest source of used EV departures. So again, EVs continue to grow, but we're seeing a definite shift in where that growth is coming from. So wanted to talk about for a couple of minutes here about turning some of the EV challenges and opportunities. So we talked about why EVs are coming to the marketplace to meet kind of the emissions and regulation challenges that are going to be out there. We talked about a lot of the pricing volatility that's been out there. We talked about the rising levels of inventory, and we talked about how much kind of natural demand is out there, depending on what location you're in. So 3 things just kind of want to talk about here. So number one kind of concern I hear when I talk to different parties is concerned about fixed ops or parts and service, and how EVs can impact that. So if you look at NADA data, you can see that total service and parts sales per year continues to go up, but there is definite concerns when it comes to EVs, how it could impact that revenue. Particularly, EVs are going to need oil changes, fluid flushes, engine air filters, and the like. So that is 100% fact. But it's important to note that EVs are still going to need maintenance as well. It's just a different type of maintenance, and going to be a little bit of a different type of education process for consumers. I think consumers at this point are really well educated the fact that you need an oil change every X number of miles. The vehicle will actually tell you now when that needs to happen. But I think there's a little bit more kind of an education that needs to take place to get it out there. So EVs still require service. Tires. This is always such an interesting thing for me on 2 fronts. So one, EVs are much heavier, particularly with their batteries. So tires tend to wear out faster on EVs. And second thing, and one that I've heard a lot, is that without those oil changes, a lot of initial kind of EV buyers tend to forget that they need to go in and get tire rotations. And so they're actually wearing through their tires at a much faster rate because they're not getting them rotated. And the EVs are so much heavier that it's helping to blow through those tires relatively faster. So relatively just kind of an education point of view for consumers out there about what they need. Again, cabin air filters, windshield wipers, all that type of stuff is still going to be necessary. And so I really kind of think of it as an education upfront for consumers about what type of maintenance they're going to need for EVs. And again, that's kind of the front end maintenance. Longer term EVs, the batteries are going to need to be replaced over time. And that's going to be a little bit of a larger cost down the road. So just kind of keep that in mind as, yes, there is going to be some disruption when it comes to parts and service on kind of the front end, but and the back end and with some education, I think there is still revenue on the parts and service front. And then when you think about franchise dealers, it's important to note that OEMs are still going to grade on service retention. So it's, imperative to make sure that you're helping to educate consumers, particularly new EV consumers, on what type of maintenance they're going to be needing. Second thing is that EV recalls are increasing, not surprisingly, as EVs continue to grow as an overall percentage of total market share. We're starting to see more EV recalls take place. And you can see this through NHTSA data, both in the number of recalls and the number of vehicles recalled. So while EVs have less mechanical components, if you look at the number of components in a powertrain, compared from internal combustion engine to an EV powertrain, much simpler, much less parts. The ones that are in there tend to be much larger and much more expensive. And so warranty repair work and EVs could help offset some of the costs, some of the profit loss due to the loss of oil changes and the like on that front. So another thing to keep in mind, But always important, you got to keep the appropriately trained staff to handle EV maintenance. And then also got to have the space to store a lot of the necessary components for EVs. I've heard some discussions about what certain new warranty repair look like for certain EVs and the amount of space you would need to have all the different batteries and components for storage for that type of maintenance work. So things to kind of keep in mind on that front when it comes to EVs. And then third thing is kind of closing the gap on price between EVs and internal combustion engines. So at this point, internal combustion engines are still going to be a much more attractive price point initially for consumers. And so think about from this point of view of how can you really help to kind of close that gap for consumers who might be interested in it. Couple of things. Obviously, the Inflation Reduction Act extended EV tax credits on the new side, depending on the individual automaker. They may have been out of EV tax credits. They may have been running low as a percentage of EV tax credits. We've saw an extension to overall EV tax credits. Again, additional considerations to income and sourcing rules that we're still kind of working through, but overall, for the most part, EV tax credits are much more widely available on the new side than they were before. And on the used side, we also saw additional tax credits there, so that will be helpful. In 2024, I think this is still working through the U.S. Treasury right now and rules, but there's going to be a switch to a point-of-sale transfer, which should really help, particularly for consumers who are price sensitive or monthly payment sensitive on the EV front. So that should help on both the new and used side. On the new side, particularly OEM incentives, you can see here, overall, we're seeing much higher incentives for EVs versus non-EVs at this point. And so it's going to be really imperative for OEMs to continue to incentivize EVs to help kind of get consumers out there and help close that gap until the cost per kilowatt hour really comes down and helps close that parity gap there. And then for dealers, OEMs, it will need to incentivize dealers in the back end to continue to incentivize dealers to adopt and sell EVs and make the necessary shifts there. So that's it for prepared remarks on that point. I don't know if we've received any questions or not, but let me pause there and see if we have any questions.
Thank you so much, Kevin. So much great information about the evolving EV markets and that segment of the industry. And if you do have a question for Kevin Roberts, the Director of Industry Insights at CarGurus, just use the chat function here on Zoom and we'll get to those questions. And in the meantime, Kevin, just a couple of questions that have come to mind stemming from your great presentation. Just perhaps put on your Nostradamus outfit or get out your crystal ball here. And as some of your charts showed, there's kind of quite the concentration of EVs in certain states and markets. When do you think electric vehicles might make that leap into more of a mainstream situation looking forward, and the momentum that's been generated thus far, pun intended? When do you think EVs might become more mainstream, do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple factors at this point. I think largely range anxieties mitigated from a consumer's concern point of view. I think they've realized that most of their trips tend to be relatively short. And so for the most part, range anxiety isn't going to be as key of a factor. The two things that I think are going to be a key factor is, one, getting the cost per kilowatt hour down on the batteries so we can reach cost parity with internal combustion engines. That'll be the first kind of step to getting more mainstream adoption. And the second is going to be making sure that you have enough charging infrastructure, either on the home front, if possible, or publicly available charging, and making it fast enough that consumers view the trade-off as worth it. I think that will be what needs to happen to get to the tipping point. Again, this brings up a lot of uncertainty about the grid and the like that still need to be resolved. But once we see those two things kind of get to that point, I think we'll see EV sales really start to take off.
And another forward-looking question that's certainly perhaps a bit difficult to answer, and on the minds of dealerships everywhere in the current landscape of the car markets. When might EV vehicles or EV prices stabilize, and especially in light of all the circumstances at play? When might there be some stabilization on the pricing side of things?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see some stabilization now. So the year-over-year numbers still look um, quite something. But if you look at the month-over-month numbers, they seem to be, particularly in the used side, starting to stabilize a little bit, which is actually running counter to what we're seeing in the overall marketplace. So I think we might be seeing some stability there. Again, all it will take is certain automakers to start lowering new prices again. We could see another kind of shift on that front. And then I will mention, I know it's never a fun topic to talk about, but oil prices are on the rise, which means gas prices will not be far behind. And consumers tend to be quite sensitive to gas prices or rising. If they reach to a certain level, we could see a surge in EV interest again, which could actually put upward pressure on prices. So, as usual, highly dynamic environment, but it looks like we might be finding some stability now.
Again, the voice you're hearing for this special webinar titled "The Impact of EVs and How to Position Your Dealership for Long-Term Success" is Kevin Roberts, who is Director of Industry Insights at CarGurus. And Kevin, as we look again at the broad EV landscape and which makes and models are available, what do you think? Which vehicle segments perhaps are missing out on the EV adaptation, interest, and growth? Might there be an opportunity for some particular vehicle segments? What do you think?
As a parent of small children and full-size car seats, I am still looking for that EV minivan out in the segments. Still have not seen that out there. A lot of good plug-in hybrid options, but not a full electric. I know I am probably in a niche minority on that one. I really think when we look towards more mainstream adoption, I think as we start to get more CUVs, particularly kind of CUVs at more kind of attractive price points, under 50K, under 40K, at least kind of, MSRP, as we start to see more of those CUVs where consumers have really been migrating over the past decade or so. Once we see more, proliferation of EVs in that segment, I think will really help drive adoption.
Closing moments here on our webinar, the impact of EVs and how to position your dealership for long-term success, with Kevin Roberts, the Director of Industry Insights at CarGurus. And Kevin, to round us out, we were chuckling before we got started about how much you've had to discuss a certain topic that's in the news nowadays. So we won't let you get away without touching on it here for the webinar, and that's the UAW strike that's happening involving the three major domestic automakers, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. How might the UAW strike have an impact on EV demand, at least here in the near term? Just how might those two topics impact each other?
So I would say it's a dynamic situation. It's hard to know exactly how it might evolve. I'd say at this point we haven't seen a significant impact on production that would impact EVs. So I don't think it's had an immediate impact at that point. Longer term, again, highly dependent upon what type of agreement is made. There could be an impact on EV prices longer term for automakers, but at this point, it would be mostly conjecture at this point to try to estimate how that might actually look.
That's Kevin Roberts, Director of Industry Insights at CarGurus, our experts for our webinar, The Impact of EVs and How to Position Your Dealership for Long-Term Success. Kevin, so much great information. Thank you so much. And all the best to those guys wearing the Honolulu blue this NFL season. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And on behalf of all of us at Cherokee Media Group, we thank you so very much for joining us, and we look forward to having you again next time.